Okay, well, let's start today's session. Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes, and welcome to this new event organized by the T-Factor project team. As you probably know, T-Factor is an Horizon 2020 innovation action founded by the European Commission, where we're trying to bring light into the impact that this emerging practice called temporary use or meanwhile use can have in the way our cities are being built and evolve. Some kind like a living organism. We believe approach that has been the gold standard in the last decade is probably not enough to keep pace with some of the challenges that we're trying to find solutions in the urban environment. And one of the big challenges we have is the ecological transition that our societies have to deal with in the following years. The sooner the better. And today, since our conversation usually involves cities and we have great correspondence all over Europe and abroad, we thought that it would be a fantastic session to talk about what's going on in four forward-thinking cities such as Amsterdam, Barcelona, London, and Milan, with first-hand experience from our experts in the T-Factor team. So this activity is framed in the T-Lab 1 of the T-Factor structure that is focused on arts, culture, and creativity, and where with the guidance of Professor Mick Finch from the University of the Arts London Central St. Martin's, we're trying to explore how communities of practice can convene and mobilize to address the challenges with new approaches, trying to somehow extend the field of what's possible in the city and trying to find concrete solutions to the ecological problems we are still kind of finding proper ways to keep pace with. So let me give you a couple of insights for the session. We are going to start in a few minutes with the first panel on urban ecology that I will be moderating with Rosalie back from Waag in Amsterdam, that will be talking about new approaches to urban ecology with the Amsterdam Science Park case. Waag is an organization that works at the intersection between arts, technology, and society. They are a T-Factor member of the project, and they'll be explaining their more than human approach to what's going on in one of the big urban development areas in the city of Amsterdam. We will then hear the history of the Urban Poplar project and its Eco-Civic prototyping approach by Andrew Belfield from Public Works in London. Public Works is an art and architecture practice that works within and towards public space. We will have then a Q&A and open discussion between these two panelists, open, of course, to the questions that the audience will have. We'll have a quick coffee break around 3 o'clock, and then we'll come back 10 minutes later with the second panel, Nature-Based Solutions, that will be moderated by my colleague Besnik Mehmeti from ANSI Toscana. And in this panel, we will have the pleasure to host Isabel Ruiz-Mayen from the Barcelona Urban Transformation and Global Change Lab of the University Abierta de Catalunya. And the title of the session will be The Transformative Capacities of Bottom-Up Climate Resilience Strategies. And then later on, we will have Andrea Balestrini from LAND in Milan. Both LAND and the University of Catalonia are partners of the T-Factor project. And Andrea will explain to us new participative approaches as starters towards ecologically sound landscape projects. We will then have another Q&A and open discussion, and we will keep an eyes open to any question or remark you might have in the audience to keep the conversation going. So without further delay, I leave the floor or the screens to my colleague Rosalie. Hello, Rosalie, how are you?
Hi there. Good day. I'm Rosalie. I'm doing pretty okay. I have a bit of a cold, so if my voice fluctuates a bit more than usual, that is the case. Let me try to see if I can share my screen to start. And, happy to see you all here. Right. If you could let me know whether you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Good day, everyone. My name is Rosalie Waag. I work for the Waag as a concept developer. And together with my colleagues Chris Julia and Floortje Vermeer, who are, I think, also present in this call, we are leading the local coalition of the Amsterdam pilot based in the Amsterdam Science Park. And in the following 15 minutes, we will be introducing you a bit to the context of the Amsterdam Science Park and introduce you to 3 different pathways that we have been exploring within our pilot concerning eco-practices, the alternative master plan, and the ZOP. So the Amsterdam Science Park is the place where we reside in for this project. And the Amsterdam Science Park is based in the eastern side of Amsterdam. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's here on the right side. And it's an area which has been in development for over a long time. The master plan is actually almost coming to completion in 2028. And the Amsterdam Science Park is dominated, I would say, by large educational institutions. There's a lot of fundamental research taking place, and they present themselves as a D-hub for knowledge, education, and innovation. There's mainly students and workers residing there, other than also some inhabitants of the outskirts of the science park. But other than this more human and knowledge-centered identity, the Amsterdam Science Park is actually also connected to some interesting green pathways in the Amsterdam city and also the region around it, which you can see here on the right side. And it's a place which has an interesting dynamic to it. Because there's a lot of workers and students being present, you have this sort of ebb and flow of dynamics of usage in the park, with a lot of activity during the day, not so much during the night times, but also the terrain being totally vacant, for instance, during summer. On the other hand, you also clearly see that the balance between densification and greening the environment are an issue there. And this is sort of the dynamic where we try to work in and play with. This is the moment for the first sip of water. So before I start off by telling you what the objective of our pilot is, I think there's a term that we first need to describe a bit better, and that's the urban ecology. And within the urban ecology, we approach the city really as a living space, a place where there's a multitude of different actors, entities, materials, and flows, all being mutually dependent on each other. It's a system which is complex, but there's a lot of ecological and social dynamics constantly reworking each other. It's co-inhabited by both humans and non-humans, or more than humans, if you would often say. And that leads to alternative questions on mutual care and well-being in this environment. An environment that, in our perspective, is made not only by those that are human, but also those that are non-human, right? And we believe that if you really start to understand that plants, bats, birds, microorganisms, the wind and rain are equal partners in this making of the city, then that totally needs to shift who you can make and unmake this city with. Coming back to the pilot, our main question is how we can renew the relationship to nature in the urban environment. And with the work that we do, we hope to introduce ecology as the ecology of non-human actors as an active stakeholder in development plans, such as in the Amsterdam Science Park, and to strengthen and enliven the social, economic, and ecological area, a fabric of the area with meanwhile and hopefully also permanent usages. Well, if we come back to this question on how to renew the relationship to nature, there's obviously a sort of wide variety of routes that you can take. And in the coming, I think, 10 minutes or so, I would like to introduce 3 different pathways that we've chosen. One is on the level on community and on relation. One is on the level of the master plan, and one is on the level of governance. So our first way of working has to do with eco-practices. And before I introduce you what our eco-practices are or could be, it's maybe good to specify that eco here is short for ecology, so really dealing with the relation between organisms amongst themselves and the physical environment, and not with eco, because eco usually speaks more to doing no harm to the environment. And we are really interested in this more relational aspect of being. So under the umbrella of eco-practices, we view this as a sort of growing instrumentarium of methodologies, tools, and methods and principles that we use to question our relationship to nature, to rethink it, and also in the end to renew it. And it's important to state that these are actions, not only ways of thinking, right? Actions that are situated, that start from the locality of the ground, in the field. That these actions are process-based and open-ended, meaning that we allow for a certain permeability and constant iteration of the actions that we do, and that are also community-centric, really starting from the conversation and the needs from the people on the ground. These actions are also embodied, right? We want you to use your hands, your body, and your senses in order to learn and to make the environment, and to do this through co-creative and cartographic processes. And we like to do that together, in close cooperation with artists, locals, leading experts, but also with the non-human and long-living world. And to give you an example of some of our methodologies and principles, we are very keen on Anat Singh and her Art of Noticing, which we sort of adopt to consider the different ways in which we can become susceptible and attuned to the environment. We are playing around with the method of field note taking, so how you can actually report from the ground in a meaningful way. We're exploring the community of practice, as we are doing today, and the ZOE model is also something that we are exploring, and I will introduce you to that a little bit further in the presentation. So how do we do these practices? Well, I have 4 examples brought with me. One of the first things that we did in our area was to work together with 3 local stakeholders. Anna Stuiner Ruigte, a permaculture garden, Jeugdland, a youth playground, and Buurderij Polder, which is a farm-to-fork initiative. And we sat down at a table and created a walk. A walk that would lead you through the various locations on the Amsterdam Science Park, but it would also allow you to consider the different perspectives that are there. So together with a map and some question and answer cards, we would send you in the field. And some questions, for instance, were who has ownership of the land? Should that be the landowner, the farm, the grass, the soil, or the microorganisms? Or we had another experiential exercise where we asked the participants, who could also be children, to imagine life as a worm and use their senses to explore the environment. And it was a really good opportunity also to test the water with the stakeholders to see what kind of co-creation efforts were applicable. Another workshop that we hosted took place a couple of weeks ago, which was a children workshop called Building Like a Beast, where the children, together with 2 artists, Esme Geerke and Thijs de Zee, went on a sort of wild adventure in the Amsterdam Science Park area, where they were invited to build like a beast. Not only for beasts, but also really embody it. And to give you an impression of what they made, on the left side, you see the start of a beaver hut. On the middle, there's a speculative boat that also allows for some beekeeping. And totally on the right side, they built a sort of boat for ducks that also provides shade for the fishes. Then we also undertook some more regular workshop, of course, because we really want to co-create with the stakeholders and the people on the ground. Because next year we're going to do more activities, and we want that to be based on their ideas as well. So this was the first part of our stakeholder workshop, where we mapped more the challenges and opportunities of the site. And next week we will continue that conversation to also ideate some potential events that we can organize and interventions, I have to say, that we can organize from next year on. And what we're hoping to do in the near future is to also start to play around with wilderness and garden spaces, maybe lifting some tiles so that we can do some greenery here on the left side or have some other experimental playing grounds. So let's come back to the idea of the city as a living space. If you want to understand all the different kinds of relationships that are there, we believe that it's important to place yourself within these different relationships, to become susceptible to a certain way of listening and understanding what is there. But these insights also need to be shared. We need to come from an encountering to a sharing of these perspectives. And this is where the alternative master plan comes in. So all the eco-practices that we have undertaken so far are a way for us to stretch the map of the Amsterdam Science Park. A way to cartograph all the different ideas and relations that are there so that we can come to a multi-voiced perspective of the area, which will funnel into something that we call the Amsterdam Master Plan, Alternative Master Plan, which is really meant as an alternative to this more formalized one-directional document that is now a master plan. We see this really as a sort of platform that we can develop where we include 3 levels of ecology, mental, social and environmental. So including the stories, the dreams and the aspirations of the people, identify specific activities, group and territories that are there, and also demonstrating the infrastructures, the habits and some of the metabolisms. And we hope to build a type of master plan that would allow for this dynamism to also be represented, where there's multitude of perspectives, narratives, things and beings being present in the master plan that you can ideally also even look into over time. So both looking back, but also towards the future. Thus far, we collaborated with some young AI talents to create a first prototype for the digital platform, which would allow not only the mapping of organisms, for instance, to really see what is growing there, but to also collect values of the area, where we combine photographs with comments and geotagging, for instance. And we're collaborating with a master student called Lotte Sluis at the moment to also consider the different ways in which more than humans can be included in decision-making processes and also citizen designs, citizen science projects. 13? All right, then I'll speed it up. We're nearly there. Thank you. So what we will use it for, we see that this could be an instrument for policymakers to get insights into the values of the areas, use it as a co-creation platform for the planning of activities, as a form of participation with where citizens and municipalities can work together and to mobilize community engagement. Last one, I'll try to make it brief. We spoke about renewing the relationship on the level of the community, on the master plan, but of course there's also governance. And we opt for the installing of more than human governance on the Amsterdam Science Park. And there is a perfect model to do so, which is called the ZOOP, which is an organization that includes in its board of directors a representative that can speak on behalf of non-human life, so that the perspectives and the needs of these non-human lives are being taken with them in organizational decision making. I'm losing my words due to the 2-minute remark, I think. But I strongly encourage you to look it up. It's developed by the Nieuwe Instituut, and we believe that's a very, very suitable model for organizations to start to incorporate the perspectives of non-human lives. Obviously, we are trying to become a ZOOP, which is complex because there's no less than 3 owners of the area. But we feel that the method of the ZOOP might at least be a good form of communication about some of the themes that we have been discussing today. And I will close off with a beautiful quote from, I believe it's Ursula Le Guin. I encourage you to just take a screenshot of it and read it at home, but it provides a beautiful alternative view on the history of humanity as one that is not being founded on domination, but on gathering, holding, and sharing. That's it. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you also for listening.
Thank you for the presentation and the beautiful quote at the ending. We all feel a bit represented on it. Quickly reading it, and we will go back to it. So I think we can give the screens now to our colleague Andrew. Andrew, are you there?
Yeah. Hi everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation. I will just try and share my screen. Okay. Is that full screen?
Yes.
Brilliant. So yeah, thanks very much for the invitation to take part in today. I work as part of a group called Public Works, and I was invited by Rhiannon and Andreas, who are part of the Central St. Martin's team at T-Factor. I called this presentation Eco-Civic prototyping because I understand that as a form of situated design practice, which focuses on co-produced bottom-up resilience to local climatic challenges. And I guess the kind of lessons from reflects the kind of ongoing iterative nature of the projects which we're working within. So first of all, Public Works. Public Works is an interdisciplinary design practice, and we work across the fields of art, architecture, and activism. And we're really interested in about bringing social and environmental change within cities. Within that project, I'm working mainly on a collaborative project called Urban. So Urban is a research project between Public Works and l'Atelier d'Architecture de Haute-Gérée, or AAA, and explores urban and civic resilience, designing and initiating a series of eco-civic hubs which support alternative resilient modes of living in our cities. This talk focuses on our embedded research and project work in Poplar, East London, at the Teviot Eco-Civic Hub. Poplar and the hub itself is located in this green square. Is located just north of Canary Wharf and in the East End of London, and is an area undergoing extensive regeneration. The Poplar Hub has developed incrementally over the past 4 years as a form of situated design practice, which engages the locality in the realities of our unfolding climate crisis and co-produces bottom-up responses to these challenges. The hub itself consists of a series of prototype infrastructures testing a more resilient food system, improving air quality through green infrastructure, and supporting the potential for a more circular and reproductive economy in our city. We understand our work as activists in the sense that we are working from an embedded position within a community, trying to make material change to the Poplar neighbourhood by embracing Donna Haraway's partial perspective of place, or the view from somewhere. We engage citizens within their lived reality, identifying local issues of local importance, and recognise the existing local capacities which can be nurtured for future change. Rather than adopting the role of the service provider or the expert support for locally engaged groups in the traditional sense of the architect, our approach adopts a form of situated design practice which responds to localised problems and co-produces solutions. The work of the architect goes beyond design and problem solving and focuses on relational design practices which build networks of solidarity and knowledge within the Poplar Hub. This knowledge is manifested in the prototype infrastructures developing on site, developing systems, objects, and processes which address local needs. Within this situated form of practice, we encounter multiple different groups working between several communities of knowledge to define, develop, and deliver the project. To better understand the relationship between these groups, we'll consider how the 2 case study projects at Urban worked between a community of place and a community of concern. The community of concern are often brought to Urban through an idea we are exploring within a project, with professional or personal interest within a field of knowledge. Informed by Latour's matters of concern, this community are gathered around a dynamic process of understanding a condition, active in the production of knowledge within the changing site of Urban. Their expertise rejects the static understanding of knowledge as matters of fact, but instead is actively involved in developing new insight through their concern. The community of place describes the actors we met through the location of our work at Urban. This community includes the human actors within the local community, such as the residents from the local estate, local schools and youth groups, as well as outlined and youth groups. As outlined by Latour's description of networks made up of social and material assemblages, communities of place also considers the influence on more than human we encountered as a result of being situated, such as the growing ecology of the sites, the fabric of the post-war social housing estate where the project is situated. In facilitating the collaboration between these groups, our role is to translate ideas across multiple different disciplines, reconfiguring and reimagining the knowledge gathered to engage and inspire the different communities within the project. This exchange happens through an open process of prototyping. The prototyping of the moss wall at Urban started with the problem and the contradiction of setting up an eco hub just off the A12, which is one of the most polluted roads in London. You can see it running kind of diagonally across the site here. Air pollution disproportionately affects those on lower incomes, and the effect is highly localized. Living adjacent to what is essentially a 3-lane motorway can have a significant impact on child development and public health. Having recently moved from Poplar from the Olympic Park, we applied for funding to run a public programme of talks and workshops to discuss the poor air quality as a feature of the new community of place we found ourselves within. Through a launch event, we invited a community of concerned with air quality to a discursive dinner with talks from Friends of the Earth, the Green Party, and members of the local housing association's air quality department, joining residents from the estate. The meal was developed in response to our ignorance as architects about air quality and created a format to learn from a community concerned with improving local air quality and a community who lived and often grew up with polluted air. It was through this discussion that we met the sustainability department at the University of East London, who suggested the use of moss within a wall to filter air as it passed into the community garden. We moved from passively observing the condition of poor air to actively exploring how we could improve it. This idea was developed through a series of prototypes, developed and built with local primary school and a local youth club, and during an architecture summer school. Designing and delivering these workshops with these groups became an opportunity to translate the expert knowledge from the University of East London into clear principles which structured the task of designing the wall. Building prototypes became an empowering group activity, as it provided the opportunity to consider how we could actively improve the conditions we found ourselves within. The wall as a built prototype became a concrete way to understand abstract ideas of air quality, and the ongoing care for prototypes built a practice of collective care, returning to these abstract ideas through the physical object of the wall. The role of the architect was to synthesize the learning from these workshops and feed it into different questions about before the next iteration. Through the translation of ideas between the community of concern and the community of place, we were able to stay with the trouble of the project, collectively understanding a condition and sharing a responsibility to respond and improve it. The agency of the project is in the ability to explain the conditions of poor air. We did not present a solution developed out of our expertise, but instead embrace the idea of discussing what we did not yet understand. The second prototype, in parallel with the moss wall we've been working on, is working on a resilient food system or a circular food system within Poplar. Here our role continues as a co-learner in the process, working across multiple disciplinary and community boundaries to engage a diverse range of stakeholders in the co-production of a localized closed loop food system. Again, we mediate between communities of scientific knowledge and knowledge rooted in place, acting as a facilitator of action and designing the systems and infrastructure for this circular food system. Our role as designers can be understood in our initiation of the process, identifying acute local needs and assembling the diverse groups needed for the project's realization. Similarly to the Moss Wall, the process began with a local problem, that being the lack of access to food waste recycling for the neighbouring estate. The Teviot is a mixture of low-rise flats, and the local authority does not allow collection of food waste to such properties. In addressing this sole issue, we identified the need for wider engagement with the whole food system, developing a circular infrastructure which addresses all stages of the food system. Residents expressed a keen interest in urban food growing, reflecting the desire to grow crops unavailable within the UK supermarkets. This evolving prototype brings together local growing expertise, micro-allotments, and it combines it with composting and anaerobic digestion technology to create a circular food system. The AD is a process where we break food waste down anaerobically and produce biogas, which can be used on site in the community kitchen, and a liquid fertilizer, which can be utilized for hydroponic food growing. Through a program of public workshops, we've engaged in a co-learning process between the community of place, the residents, and our community of concern. In this example, our engineers and enterprises, creating a space for mutual learning across the groups, where we share knowledge of lived experience and how that interacts with the technical complexity of the food waste recycling process. Through the shared development of a circular food system, we hope to address wider systemic change within the neighbourhood, scaling this prototype to other pockets of available or underutilised land. By focusing on creating an engaging process, which brings together diverse stakeholders, we aim to affect culture change from a dual perspective. Through participation in the project, we hope to affect local cultures within the community of place and realise the value of local production and waste recycling. The project also aims to speak up to local authorities, such as the Greater London Authority, and in other important strategic partners, such as housing associations, by demonstrating best practice for a localised circular food model, which can be replicated elsewhere and by other communities. Our next challenge is around scalability, going beyond the small pocket of engaged residents and the 20 or so families either growing food or recycling food waste on site. And the latest questions around how we can scale our hub to address the entirety of the 780 homes on the Teviot, or the future planned neighbourhood of nearly 3,000 homes. Could we integrate these ideas within the proposed redevelopment of the Lansbury to realise a zero-mile waste neighbourhood, which grows local, organic and nutrient-rich food and creates green jobs in the process? Our work as part of the Women's Environment Network's Just Fact programme now furthers this work towards this goal. And over the next two years, we'll be realising this vision for a closed-loop, resilient food system in Poplar. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for the stimulating first front row perspective that you're giving us about what's going on in London. I'm also curious about what are your feelings towards each other's presentation, because Amsterdam and London with Berlin, you could say that you were in the previous century the mothership of temporary use, and right now we can see that in this new age there's also a lot of proofs of concept that go through the similar path. So maybe it would be interesting to hear your impression on each other's presentation. And then I wanted to ask you, before the rest of the audience joins us with more questions that, by the way, you can put on the chat, how do you feel that we can accelerate this transition beyond proofs of concept? how do you convince what you could say traditional stakeholders, people with suit and ties, with other issues such as capital gathering or stakeholders complexity? How do you convince them that these more than human approaches and community-based solutions can actually scale? You can start, whoever wishes to get the ball started, please go ahead.
I can start, Andy. Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's a feast to listen to your presentation in the sense that there's a lot of topic and themes that we share, obviously. Not only on working with the more than human, but also this attitude of constant iteration is something that I really recognized in your presentation. And it feels, right, I think you're working there for already 4 years.
Yeah.
We are now starting in our first year, so I see indeed like a sort of pathway that we might take and some ambitions also for the future. And I think what really struck me was this idea of prototyping also as community building, which was very interesting, I think, also for us to explore. And this division of both a community of place and a community of concern. And I was curious, did you start out with these two sort of quite strict, identified, but very, I think, useful communities? Or I was wondering how you arrived at those two elements.
I mean, I think with on that kind of distinction, it actually came from before. So we located in Poplar for the last 4 years, but before we're located in Hackney Wick. And that was a mobile strategy which was exploring existing resilient practices of a place, Hackney Wick. And what we found was we drew quite a network of people who were already engaged within these kind of discourses around like resilience or sustainability or climate. And so we had quite a large network of groups who were that community of concern. They were concerned about resilience. And then the community of place became more when we actually established a hub, a physical location, which was on the corner of the Teviot housing estate. And since then, it's been about trying to, I guess, mediate and translate between those different forms of those different communities, and finding that the really exciting places where they intersect and where kind of almost like everyday practices also interrelate with groups of academics or groups of engineers who are working from a very different perspective. So I've definitely found that over the last particularly over the last 2 years working within Poplar, and this process of prototyping, how it evolves iteratively, has been really quite productive. But to maybe jump to the next question around scalability and like how we go from temporary use to realizing different master plans or visions. I think that is naturally this is the hardest question which we're facing, which is how do you go beyond best practice, and how do some of these ideas start to take shape? And I guess our approach has been to try and work, I guess, strategically with different partners, and in trying to realize what the different value is of this approach. And you have to play certain games around realizing quantifiable targets of carbon savings, for instance, which speaks to a certain audience, but then also recognizing that there's different values at stake here, and convincing councils or funders of these different values, of whether it's knowledge, or I thought in Rosalie's case, valuing that the more than human perspective really closely. So I think I'm not technically clear about how we're going to achieve that over the next 2 years of our project, but that is definitely our kind of ambition, which is, I guess, a recognition of different values, which recognize social as well as kind of ecological values when making decisions about how we think about cities, particularly around infrastructures, around food growing, food waste recycling in our case.
And very interesting. And would you have any suggestion for lawmakers that you think could imagine you have the superpower to include a specific paragraph in a law? what paragraph would you include in which law that could help you make your vision more realistic? Because there is a policy issue. What you are doing somehow, both in Amsterdam and in London, is creating new types of value that is not just monetary value around city making, and that eventually that proof of concept can become something that could be incentivized with legislation and regulation. Is there something that you have in mind that could make your visions go faster and reach higher ambitious points?
I mean,
also answer no, huh? It's not an easy question, of course.
yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, like so much of urban development in London, I only know the context of London, but is driven by economic drivers, and even to the extent of like when projects are evaluated by the Greater London Authority, one of the biggest factors always comes back to cost, whether it's like the cost of the design team or the cost, the total budget, whatever it might be. And so I guess maybe around policy, which recognizes these different values, or maybe takes, for example, Rosalie's example of the governance system, which starts to foreground other values and other perspectives. That, I mean, writing that into policy would be super interesting, about having a kind of, rather than just an economic viability assessment is what they use in the UK, but also have a kind of social and an ecological one. Although it might just end up in kind of more technical reports and more consultants, but
yeah, and enrich the conversation, you know, beyond the economicist and monetary aspect, because if you just keep on that track, it's very difficult to talk about other things. Rosalie, your concept around Zoop raised Mick's attention. Could you expand a little bit more for him and the rest of the audience?
Yeah, definitely. I will try to do so. So the Zoop is a quite new model, which would work like this. So let's say that I am my own company and I want to include the perspectives of non-humans in my decision making. Then within my board of directors, I open up one seat. So also within the constitution of my company, to be the representative of this non-human, or the non-humans, right? It's plural. And this representative works, of course, with the board of directors in his or her own company, but also with the Zoop Institute. And every year you would have, let's say, about 4 to 5 ambitions that you want to achieve within your Zoop, so within your board of directors that also has a representative as a non-human. And that should be really embedded in the institution or the organization. And I think it's really interesting because, of course, you also have Ecocide, for instance, right, which is on a much larger scale. But I like the fact that the Zoop can be adopted also within small institutions and larger institutional bodies, right? And you would go through sort of 4 different processes to understand better the location that you are at, the different kinds of organisms that are there. You take you investigate the different kinds of relations that are there, also some of the tensions that arise in the area, right? Because the organization also works with other organizations in a specific domain, and you would investigate it and then come to a set of things that you can do to achieve, and you're going to be held accountable also, right? So it's almost like a sort of a membership. So if you do not improve your location, then you will lose the risk. You will have the risk of not being a Zoop anymore. Does that give a bit of a explanation?
Yeah, but we're getting more questions, so it's definitely raising attention. Patrick,
yeah, it's from the.
For instance, how are the values defined in that system, and what are the rules of engagement? And and then besides governance, I think everybody is also asking who gets to pick the representatives, because the nature cannot vote.
Yeah, of course, this is an issue, right? We cannot overcome our humanness, right? In the end, it's still humans working on behalf of on other than humans. So this is always in tension, I think, and the parameters are still being defined a bit, I would say. So the legal framework is finished. But we have to start becoming proto-zoops, right? Aspiring zoops to also understand where these tensions arise. And ideally, for instance, they would say that you would choose an ecologist, right, to enter your board of directors if you are a tech company, I don't know, right? So that you really have someone there who has knowledge, and not only on a sort of really great academic level, but really profound knowledge on the issue. I see Chris has a hand up, but
yes, and he has a fantastic question. Chris, maybe you want to go ahead and pitch the question yourself.
Yeah, sure thing, Karim. And I just wanted to add about the zoop as to Patrick's question. Just the elegance, of course, is that it's a governance model, right? So in that sense, it's not value neutral, but it has a level of neutrality in that the board has to decide how to define the site, how to estimate improvements that are necessary, and then how to judge also whether those improvements have occurred. So in that sense, it's quite light. Everybody can adopt it as to their own standard as long as there's improvement. So I think that's really smart thing about the zoop model that I was intending to add. But of course, I was playing the field, also asking a question, which is one that has haunted me for years, and it's sort of an ongoing issue, right? With the question of scalability. Tech startups love, for example, to speak in terms of scalability. Economics of scale are a 100-year-old concept that everybody subscribes to. But at the same time, especially also what you see with Andy's work, when it comes to eco and community-based practices, they're actually really good at the micro scales, and they really work based on personal connection, communities of place, this great concept, etc., etc. So there's all these qualities that emerge at certain scales that allow these projects to blossom and bloom, ostensibly in the pilot phases. But then once we want to go to scale, once we want to go to like big level implementation, actually a lot of these relationships break down because they're not actually there at these higher scales. So I was wondering how Andy sort of reflects on that, and maybe also my colleague Rosalie, in terms of, are we paying enough attention to the scalar particularity of our work, and are we also advocating enough for the qualities of scale, so to speak, rather than scalability? And then, if you look at natural systems, they usually spread, they don't scale. So what can we learn from those kinds of qualities?
I mean, like that last point is super interesting, and I think when I talk about scalability, there's maybe a scaling of, say, our AD facility and composting to go to a slightly larger scale, but we're still talking on the kind of community. We're talking about the neighborhood scale, and then my vision for scaling these things across a city would be about almost like networks. So each maybe having a base system, but a system which can adapt to each particular locality and each community of place. So, for instance, some of the work that we're going to be doing next year is we're going to be expanding our kind of public program around workshops, which is workshops all around closed loop food growing, and we're going to do them do another program on our site. So that'll be 18 workshops taking place over the course of the year, kind of like the growing calendar, and we're going to replicate and do another community center nearby. We're going to run another similar program, but it will be catered to other local interests of that place. So I guess that kind of idea of scalability is more about kind of networking, kind of, I guess, also solidarity building between other like-minded initiatives, rather than just kind of scaling to the point where we get to kind of food waste infrastructure on the scale that we already have in cities. And so I think I'm quite interested in the value, in really highlighting the value of what would it mean if one neighborhood in London of future neighborhood of 3,000 homes in the context of the regeneration, if they had a system which the food waste was managed within that site and became a productive asset for the communities, for the environment of that place. And I guess I'm interested in, I'm not clear about how we would scale that to work across everywhere, because I think there is an inherent challenge to think that every social housing estate in London could work in this way. But I guess that's kind of how I've been approaching or been thinking about this kind of tension between kind of the qualities of kind of small scale community versus what the GLA or what the funders or the councils want to hear, which is like, how can we solve the whole problem of food waste in London, for instance?
Well, the scale issue is definitely getting some traction in the chat. Danielle Wild is saying that the scales are important, but perhaps thinking about scale shifting is more useful than scaling up or out. Or Caroline says that perhaps the question of scale is also one of sustainability in a business sense. Patrick says that the scale is an interesting issue. It's an industrialist concept that it could work as assemblage of smaller organizational structures. Daniel then adds that the possibility is critically engaged with at each moment rather than assumed as an obvious choice, and that there's this idea of everything becoming relational or rhizomatic. Do you have something to add or comment on our contribution?
Nothing to add, but to confirm, I think I think it's better to replicate on different locations, and that would also allow you to be adaptive, right? If we are all just little nodes working within within the local context, but learning from each other, we can also constantly adjust and adapt. And I think that's different if you only grow and scale. So yeah, I would just more opt for that model.
Fantastic. Well, I guess when we're living a moment of a lot of uncertainty, when there's no, scaling works when you have one solution that fits all. And right now we're more in this trial and error period when a lot of small tribes are trying, with different approaches and different resources. Daniel adds that I challenge replication. I think adoption and adaptation is required, which is what Rosalie was saying. Well, maybe I want to leave the floor to maybe a final remark from Andy and Rosalie, and then maybe we can go to the coffee break before the second session.
Well, not per se a final remark, but we have to do this all together. So just to offer up our email address, urbanecology@waag.org. If you are curious at what we're doing, or you want to join these forces or have any suggestions, reach out, right? We have to do this together.
Did I write it properly in the chat? urbanecology@waag.org.
And Andy, I would love to have a coffee and chat more about some of your learnings.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, likewise. It's really nice to. I guess I already see your project working at a different scale to kind of ours, or at least a different context. So I'd love to take you up on that offer. But thank you for inviting me. It's been already been really stimulating. So thank you.
No, thank you for the time. Thank you for the effort and for trying in a very, very complicated environment such as London. And as I said, London and Amsterdam are these places where some of the alternative futures, open the cracks on the walls. So there are important places for the rest of the urban environments, because you extend the field of what's possible somehow. So it's important to keep those cracks on the wall opening up to new alternatives and to challenge the established concepts that sometimes we take for granted. Okay, well, maybe we're gonna go a bit quicker on the coffee break. So let's take around 10 minutes and see you here in a moment. Okay. Thank you, everyone.